Good evening and welcome to the seventh e-talk of ARCO. I am Maribel López, I'm the director of the fair. Por si alguien no lo sabe, aunque ya sois bastantes los que nos seguís en estas semanas, esta charla que emitimos por Zoom dispone de traducción simultánea con nuestra supertraductora Aida, está al otro lado. Today I just want to welcome Övül, Kameelah, Lily and Sandra to this second talk centered around opening. Opening is the Young Gallery section of ARCO, in this case of ARCO Madrid. Well, I want to especially thank Övül, who we can call a senior curator in opening, because this section is organized with a rotation logic, and every curator works for the fair for 2 years. Övül already curated with Tiago de Abreu Pinto the opening in 2020, very successfully, and she will do it again with Julia Morandeira this year. Her presence and Julia's, as well as Tiago's and all the curators that have passed along the years, is the engagement they present for the section is one of the strongest points of opening. Not only the selection of galleries and artists they do, that is very, very good every year, but also the way they work with every gallery project, defining the presentation with the artists, and also in the moment they share with collectors, with curators, with other colleagues, they share the contents and help us all to give voice to these great artists. That is very, very important for the success of the fair. Well, but right now I just want to leave you the screen and thank you again, the four of you, for being part of this initiative that truly aims to bring us a bit closer in these weird times. So thank you, and Övül.
Maribel, thank you so much. It is such an honor to be part of the beautiful ARCO family and its whole community around the world. It has been a huge, very nourishing learning process for me. And today, and also after the wonderful experience with my comrade, Tiago de Abreu Pinto, if he's watching, I'm sending greetings here. We are building a wonderful opening section with Julia Morandeira. I'm sure a lot of you also following us right now would know. One thing that we have really like developed and we maintained in the opening section is like understanding the opening section as an infrastructure for the young artists and for the progressive galleries, because we both believe with Julia that the more we support each other, the better we can enable the connection of strong voices into our scene and protect the young galleries who need to be part of the large contemporary art family to continue the nourishing, strong, and also aesthetically diverse dialogue all around the world. Here, tonight, as part of our understanding around the infrastructure, we wanted to have the second talk of the opening, because as you may know, the first conversation was around the critical sensualities, which will be also one of our main threads in the ARCO section this year. We wanted the second dialogue to be on the caring infrastructures and survival strategies, because of course 2020 has been a really challenging year for us on all different terms, but especially our ways of content in contemporary art also have been seriously challenged, may it be large-scale exhibitions and may it be art fairs. And tonight we are going to be in conversation with three amazing, powerful young women of color, of their experience in these months of their artistic production, and the way they understand the way they understand the limits and means that we are going through in order to create different productive spaces for themselves in order to survive, and how we can reconstruct the idea of the caring infrastructure, intimate infrastructure, also together in dialogue. So I'm very honored to host tonight Sandra Poulson from London. She's represented by Jamek Contemporary. And Lily Kemp, also who is a young artist based in London, represented by Duarte Sequeira. And also Kameelah Janan Rasheed. Her work is represented by Nome Gallery in Berlin, and she's joining us from New York, from the East Coast. Thank you all. Maybe I would go for a very quick introduction of your artistic positions, and then I would continue with the conversation. Sandra has actually just finished her studies, and she is living and working between London and Luanda, and she's her work is a bridge around fashion politics and contemporary art, and she has an interdisciplinary practice and also large research practice. And she discusses the political, cultural, and socio-economic landscape of Angola as a case study to analyze the relationship between history, oral tradition, global political structures, and also her own position as an artist today, working and living in the structures today. And Lily is also just lives in London, as I said. She studied painting at the University of Arts London, and since winning the Fang Prize at the Woon Art Prize in 2019, also she has been selected for Bloomberg New Contemporaries 2020. And her practice especially explores how women and women's bodies are portrayed in Western art, history, culture, and visual mythologies. And last but not the least, Kameelah. I'm very, very also happy to be in conversation. Kameelah's work grapples with the poetics, politics, and pleasures of the unfinished, and with the interests in the generative qualities of incompleteness, leakage, dispersal, and syncretism. Kameelah works across an ecosystem of iterative and provisional projects. And she also has a very strong foot in the socially educationally in the social education space as well, alongside her artistic practice. So I would like to thank you all, and I'm hoping that you're having a nice evening. And Kameelah, I guess it's around 12 around there right now. So I hope it's been a nice day also for you. So I would love then maybe to start with my first question that would like to focus on your current state of production, because we of course a lot of things shifted in the way we are understanding our work. I think both artists and curators and bigger structures, as I was saying. And I'm really wondering what and how you produced during the last year with the pandemic process, and with lots of art spaces are closed, works not being able to present it as usual. What really shifted in your work in this process for you? And is there any change also the way you think about your practice? because yes, I mean, it is still fresh experience and we are still going through it, but I think we also came a long way inside ourselves. And I'm wondering about your new priorities. It would be wonderful to hear. So just also for our audience, during our first questions, we will be able to see the works of our three participating artists, also to give you an idea about how they also, what they're talking about, how they deal also in the visual space. So Sandra, shall we start with you?
Yes, hi Övül.
Hi.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you, ARCO, and Jamek Art. Your question is, I guess it's the definition of all of the questions that I've been having this last year, particularly producing during the pandemic, but also producing towards my final project at university, so my graduation project at St. Martin's, where production was interrupted from the studios to then starting happening at home, where, infrastructure, I guess, was the core, just central question and doubt of how to actually proceed. I guess that, after the first month of having no idea how to operate, because all of the school infrastructures that I was using, like casting workshops, screen printing workshops, metal, wood, suddenly I found myself without any of these. And after crying for a while, I sort of, put myself together and start just, I guess, navigating what I've always been navigating to some extent, which is operating within lack. And there's this idea of infrastructure being almost, for me, a synonym of lack. How do you respond to not having, and how do you build your own infrastructure? How do you respond to not having, so many different things in place in terms of, thinking about Angola and Luanda, the city where I'm from and that I grew up, just knowing that pretty much everything around me was actually informal, and it was created by the people as a response to this lack of something. So during the last year, I just found myself actually creating my own workshop in this space next to my flat in London. So during the first lockdown in London, I pretty much did this unauthorized occupation of roof that belongs to the flat next to where I live in North London, and just constantly hoping and praying that the owners would never come and kick me out of the space, and eventually sort of getting acquainted with the space and continuing to work and produce there with whatever means I had, but just really aware of the fact that to some extent, again, just having access to that space where I ended up turning into my workshop, to some extent my medium, to some extent my subject, it was really a response to lack. So it always sort of keeps rotating around this idea of not having and finding, and the roof occupation was my response to that.
It's like great to hear. So will you be able to maybe also, is your presentation coming in from our side, or
yes,
just one to the technical
yeah.
team? I mean, thank you. I also also it would be like maybe great to add the details of of moving of your like kind of interaction with the school in the process, and with the other students, and also how this passing process
I've been contemplating this
moved.
space since the beginning of my quarantine, the 19th of March 2020. Finally got the courage to dissociate the gesture of taking it over with the violent gesture of colonizing. Am I colonizing this roof, its population, its culture, their religion, language? I'm still trying to decipher the language of these bricks that to me shout Britishness, brickishness, and that I'm cautious to question out loud. Is this brick language too raw, too London, too Queen, too here? Some days I wish I was surrounded by the grey bricks of the unfinished houses in Luanda. But here, bricks mean finished houses. I'm used to unfinished though. I'm used to the construction materials at the corner of the house, at the entrance or garden-like outdoor space, where we wash dishes, clothes, our children. Those materials mean that there is hope to finish the house, but not yet the money for labor or additional materials. This roof is all I have alongside that hope. We don't learn that hope. We just see the plastic furniture in the house and the construction materials in the corner and process that hope. Hopefully learn it. I finally met the owners, the gentleman from Kenya, the lady from Tanzania. I can't believe I'm colonizing the roof of my own people. I think they did not think I'm African, just like them. Because when we exchanged words, they told me they are from Africa, and not immediately the actual countries. I do that sometimes. When I have one of those really remote conversations where low-key I don't expect the person to know what or where Angola is. Some people tell me I don't look like I'm from Mongolia. I get it, it's because I'm not. But really, they say that because the country Angola does not ring a bell in their heads. How much does art colonize? How much does it require audiences to assimilate, to be a similage? I can get into a similage later.
Thank you for playing the film. This is an extract, so this is about half of the actual full film. Sorry, Övül, would you mind rephrasing, just repeating your question?
No, it is okay. It is. I also wanted to hear a little bit about what we discussed about the passage from the school to the studio, but you also have partially answered, of course.
Yes. Well, just really quickly, I guess in the moment that I start working at the studio, at the roof, there's almost this feeling of emancipation in a way, because I think it's quite scary to be so close from graduating, because we know that soon we won't have access to all of those currencies that come associated with being at university and having access to the studios, the facilities, the tutors, all of the valuable resources, human and non-human, that we have access to. But to some extent, being at the roof, I felt this urge to emancipate myself in the way I worked, and just sort of knowing that whatever I needed to have in place, I would have to build it in a way. And I guess this is a little bit what's happening here. There's a lot of different conversations around this film and this roof occupation, even the negotiation that I had to have for 8 weeks with the idea of the bricks that surrounded me, that I just couldn't get over. I tried so many different ways of covering them, because I did not want to have the work existing in the context of the bricks, but I guess it's this transition that I had constantly in me between Luanda and London, even if it existing right now in London.
Yep. So it is, I think, like what comes out as of this very loaded conversation is really like kind of showing how limitations themselves can turn into a complete new interpretation, and also freedom in the work, and it also opens a new space. So thank you, Sandra, for sharing us with process. And Lily, may I turn to you? You also have been you have been also through like the finishing the school and just coming, and also establishing your practice as a young artist in the London scene. So can you also share your experience in the frame that I just asked?
Yes. I just wanted to say thank you for asking me to join this talk as well. So yeah, I graduated in 2019 and was lucky to get a studio straight after graduating. So by the time, I guess, the pandemic or the first lockdown sort of started in London, it was a couple of months into the new studio. So I moved all my stuff home, sort of planning to like really ambitiously make all these works, because I usually work on quite large scale paintings. So I knew I wouldn't be able to do that, but I thought I'd be able to work on maybe some smaller scale works. I ended up not actually making anything in the first lockdown. I found it quite hard to actually, I don't know, I was really struggling with motivation, honestly. I had nothing, I guess, like lined up and no projects to work on. And then I guess that isolated feeling of being quite cut off from both friends, but also from, I guess, like in the studio, from people you bump into the corridor, all that sort of network, that community of artists that you would have at university. But so the first lockdown sort of lifted. I sort of tried to ease my way back into it by doing a lot of like smaller pieces as a way to try and just sort of like small portrait paintings to try and just slowly ease my way back into it. And it's still, I think honestly, until maybe just before Christmas, like I still was finding it quite hard to get back into the routine of, I guess, making work, or finding a sort of a way in a routine of making work once you've left, I guess, art school, and finding ways to motivate yourself.
Maybe in the meantime, we can also ask our technical team to bring in your presentation, and then we can see in the meantime. And you also have been mentioning the different support communities also that you constructed with your fellow artists. It also would be really a nice item for our audience to hear about that.
So for me, I think I didn't really appreciate it while I was at university, but since leaving, I've realised, I think it's different for everyone. I think some people are happy, it's very individual, happy working more by themselves. But for me, going from, I guess, a sort of open studio plan at university, being surrounded by so many other artists and so many other artists working, I guess, like in different areas, in costume and theatre, not just painting, which is what I studied at uni. And I actually really miss just honestly those day-to-day conversations. It didn't have to be about art or anything specific. It was just random chit chat. But I found actually, for me, being around different types of people and talking to different types of people has a big impact on both my mental like health and well-being, and then I guess as a sort of bounce off effect in terms of my practice, and benefits it in that sense as well. So for me, I'm lucky that the studio I'm with at the moment, quite a few people, and I know the people who manage the studios are trying to get a lot of their artists to actually get to know each other, get to know each other's practices, to support each other. And I feel that's really, really important to still keep up, or I guess in some ways to create new communities once you've left education.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this clear answer. I think it also gives a very good picture for us how the young scene in also London survives today, and what kind of strategies that they're building among each other. In this round also, would you like to maybe add anything about the new trials of your work before I turn to Kameelah? What kind of new techniques that you try also, and also like kind of giving you a bit more freedom?
So since doing those smaller scale pieces, I found myself being much more comfortable actually painting and working on like a smaller scale, and through different initiatives that sort of, I guess, new initiatives that started during the pandemic, such as the Artist Support Pledge, which I know a lot of artists were selling their work through. It's sort of a bit late, but sort of now I've actually sort of started to think of ways of, I guess, just not, before I'd always sort of stuck to painting, but now I'm sort of considering things like drawing, potentially doing prints in the future. And I think it's a good way, especially when making work on that particular sort of smaller scale, and therefore at a price that is much more accessible. I feel like that way you can actually, it's another, I guess, as what the Artist Support Pledge was meant to do, it's a way of supporting each other as well, because it means you can buy your friends' artworks, you can buy people you went to uni with, because they're at a size where they can fit in your house and at a price where you can actually afford to buy it. So I feel that in terms of, obviously, emotional support is very, very crucial as well, but that on the terms of financial support, I think also makes a big difference in supporting each other as a community, as, I guess, like artists at the start of our careers.
Lovely. And thank you, Lily. And
Thank
Kameelah,
you.
may I turn to you also?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It is the afternoon out here. I'm really excited to speak with everyone. Can we go ahead and put up the images so I can just speak with them in the background? Is that fine?
Yes, I think it should be fine.
Okay, awesome.
Maybe you can ask the technical team in the meantime. It would just like take a few seconds for them to switch on the presentation. So
not a problem. So can you rephrase the question you'd like for me to respond to?
Well, I mean, from my side, as I said, like what kind of shifts your work went through in this process, and if there are any new perspectives that you gained, through the consequences of different ways of communicating, or different ways of also making the work. And talking about the work, and also building the community, building a different sort of community in order to reach different grounds with the work. So I would love to hear from your side.
Yeah, so just as some quick context, I actually didn't go to art school. My degrees are in policy and history, and I have a master's degree in social studies education. So much of my practice and my work has been organized around thinking about interdisciplinarity and the ways in which my entrance into the art world and art context often brings along the residue of the work that I did as an educator. And so for me, in the context of this pandemic, I actually didn't feel a substantial change in my ways of making work, because I often work conceptually in that I'm thinking about something, and then I'm thinking about what is the form that it needs to take in order for that idea to come through. And so I've worked in making prints, I've worked in doing large scale installations, and I've found myself in this context doing a lot more public projects. So there's a large project at Brooklyn Museum that I just finished. There's a project in California that I'm wrapping up. There's this project called Unflagging that's at Ballroom Marfa. And so I do think that the pandemic has opened up interesting opportunities for institutions and individual artists to think about what does it mean for art to sort of leak outside of institutions and be present in spaces, either on the facade of a building, in public spaces, and thinking about the digital environment as one environment for where the art lives, but also just thinking about the fact that people are still walking up and down the street. And what does it mean to encounter art in that way? And being an educator, I work in curriculum development now as my daytime work. It's really important for me to think about how the work is not didactic, but has opportunities for people to enter work as learners. And so I identify myself as a learner. One way that I'm making that learning visible is through these art works, but I also lead workshops. And so one great opportunity that sort of arisen during this time is I've been doing these things called night school, which are these gatherings where 60 of us will get into a room, and I facilitate these conversations and activities around different themes. And so for this past season, we focused on communication and perception. So we did one class that was around non-human animal counter surveillance. So we looked at these hawk moths and talked about counter surveillance and did some activities around that. I did another class that was around collaborative writing, where we learned about Ouija boards and their role in writing, collaborating with non-humans, thinking about using AI technologies in order to generate writing. And we did a bunch of writing activities. And then in this last workshop last Friday, we worked on thinking about what's real and what's fake. And we looked at GANs and deep fakes and export some of that technology. So because I often work in my home, because my studio, sometimes I need a studio, sometimes I don't. This has been a fruitful time for thinking about sort of rehoming and what does it mean to work in my home? What does it mean to find ways of communicating through multiple and different means? And I've been making like little books and zines, and yeah, I've had a pleasant time in terms of getting adjusted to not seeing people. I think it's just sort of opens up a lot of opportunities for thinking about incubation. And I guess the last thing that I'll note, because we are talking a lot about infrastructure, I think that infrastructure should always be unfinished, in the sense that I think that infrastructure should be responsive and not necessarily completely preemptive. So for me, in thinking about a lot of conversations around infrastructure and survival, and thinking about my work being focused on sort of the sort of poetics and politics and pleasures of things that are unfinished, I'm thinking about ways that we can think about infrastructure as intentionally unfinished to leave space, generate space for adaptability over time. So we had an infrastructure for how schools are running, and that infrastructure was not agile, which is why we're where we are now, right? So what does it mean to have a school infrastructure? What does it mean to have an art infrastructure? What does it mean to have a social emotional support infrastructure that is responsive versus being so rigid that it's unable to respond to change? And so I'm really interested in thinking about infrastructure as like a living organism versus like something that is always what it will be. Yeah. I think that's it. I don't know if you had another question.
Well, I mean, this is really like a wonderful bridge also to the next question that I wanted to ask, because I wanted to say, what does it mean for you, the infrastructure, and how do you really see it? How do you really define it? Because it is one of those words that's like in our everyday, but we also rarely like kind of go in deep about what it means, you know, for our context and for our work. And I think, Kameelah, thank you so much. It was a really, really beautiful way of putting infrastructure in its unfinishedness, and it's a living organism also to keep up with the needs of the community around it. So may I maybe I would also like kind of turn the question and ask also like to Sandra and Lily as well, how do they think, how can community, what does infrastructure mean for you, and then how can communities build, how can communities take part in building their making their unfinished organisms, in Kameelah's saying. So Sandra, maybe it would be lovely to hear from you, the answer first.
Yes, I feel a little bit on the spot now. Yes, I feel like during the last year, and with this, I guess, understanding of to some extent, the formal detachment from the university, there was still never the fear that the networks and the connections and the relationships were going to also suffer that detachment, because I was really lucky to build, an incredible network of creatives. There are a lot of them based in London. Many aren't. Many have left, and I feel like these are the people that actually, to some extent, they make my infrastructure possible and the machine of what I do possible, because they are the most valuable resources that I can count on and I can exchange to. And by this I mean, for example, I might come across an open call for a curation opportunity that I'm not necessarily going to apply to, but I won't miss the chance of sending it to a friend that is a curator or that is a writer. And I feel that when this sort of actions, they become just really natural. We constantly have these opportunities and these currencies coming in our direction. And this is a little bit how I feel. I feel like I will build on top of anything that is missing, and to some extent, even during university, because I studied fashion design with print. So I've been very often in these journeys of discovering how to investigate and continue my work, very often off brief, and very often not really thinking about the body constantly, and taking too long in my research, and 3 days before the hand-in not actually having what I was meant to have, but just having discovered so much in my own journeys. And so this is a bit of what I feel. I feel like that those connections that now, particularly during the pandemic, have expanded a lot for me because of how we started communicating, and how suddenly, so many different people that I just didn't know before were at the access of my computer, and people were actually replying to emails, and were actually saying, okay, let's meet, and great opportunities started happening. I feel like there's so many things that are in place now actually due to this isolation to some extent, because we started reaching out and exchanging these currencies in, I feel, much more meaningful ways since the pandemic. I don't know if I answered your question, Övül.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Really, I think it really touched a lot of the points that that I really wanted to make. In the meantime, we received a question from our audience, so I was I wanted to copy paste for you. So in order for you to see, so maybe we can take this question as our also closing point when we're coming towards our final minutes. So yes, I mean, what you are kind of sharing is really is very meaningful, and to also create this kind of self-organization mechanisms, among ourselves is certainly it also keeps the healthy and critical artistic production going on, and also feed us with poetics at the same time because of the warmth it brings. So thank you. Lily, may I turn towards you? What is infrastructure for you, and what are the ways, I think, for if we take matters in our own hands, what are the ways for the community also to contribute to the making of this unfinished but ongoing structure that keeps our artistic lives alive?
For me, I guess infrastructure in terms of the art world is the different I guess, areas of the art world, starting, I guess, schools, universities, and galleries, etc. And the people that work within these different areas of the art world, and how we all interact with each other. And then going back to what Sandra was saying, yeah, for me, I feel it is that sense of community, or that sort of, of creatives, and being around and chatting to, although right now it is mostly virtual, not face-to-face, chatting to other creators, but I feel like that's a massive support mechanism in just taking care of each other, not even in terms of, obviously a bounce-on effect has it helps motivate each other. And like Sandra was saying, you hear about different opportunities such as open calls through quite a few of my friends will tell each other different opportunities we see that we feel will be suitable for each other. But I think for me, above all, the care that's there and the actual impact it has on our well-being. Did that answer the question? I'm not too sure.
Yes. I think, of course, the questions are very connected to each other, and you're all actually kind of bridging in your answers. So it's really beautiful to see because of our previous communication. So thank you, Lily. Maybe Kameelah, just to add, I mean, thank you for really, I think you shared the kind of a very fresh methodology also in terms of like how you are like constructing work also in spot through like communication. But
Oh boy, I think you froze. I think we lost Oval. I can hop in and respond to what I think she was about to ask me, or maybe the question that was prompted there. Does that work? Yeah?
Oval
Okay.
is back. Oval is back.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
yes, so sorry. I'm I mean, also like as a question of the infrastructure, also, you know, when working in different geographies, also there are different ways of when infrastructures play like. Thank you for your understanding. So, Kameelah, like to follow up from where I'm like, I would love to hear your understanding of community also in this sense, and how community directly put like kind of hands-on, can work hands-on in terms of like keeping this or like shifting the way of infrastructure, like art and artistic infrastructure, social infrastructure functions. I believe our answers are also particularly important, as you know, we are trying to keep alive. We are trying to keep, you know, art and culture high on the agenda, you know, as a necessity, you know, as a mode of living, as communication, and as for us, you know, to survive, and for us like also to recover. So yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is like infrastructure only has a purpose if the folks within the infrastructure are using it. And so I also want to be mindful of thinking about like the humans and the non-humans who sort of occupy and make use of the infrastructure, right? And so when I think about community, there's a concern around, yes, obviously ensuring that art institutions and art programs and art initiatives survive, but also thinking about at a very basic level that the people like the guards and the groundskeepers and the other folks that like keep these institutions alive also are being well supported. And I think to that end, when it comes to community, I'm thinking a lot about what does it mean to form groupings at this time that are both intergenerational and also are mindful of all the different types of folks who need support right now. So within our institutions, there's obviously curators who need support, us artists need support, but the guards who used to make sure that folks got in and out the building need support. The folks who used to make sure that art went up on the wall need support. And so I think in that way, that's one element of community that I'm thinking about that I think is super important. I think the other part is just being mindful of like pushes for productivity at this time. I think capitalism is pushing us all in this direction, obviously, always, of our worth being tied to how much we're able to produce, even in times of extreme crisis and just complete upheaval. And so I think part of the survival of art institutions is an awareness or a shift in how they understand time and pacing. Like, what does it actually mean to give an artist a grant to work on something for a year and to have 4 exhibits instead of 10 exhibits in a given year, which gives both viewers a chance to slowly work through the work, but also gives artists a chance to like not be pushed into these cycles of like production for production's sake. And so I do hope that at this time, in thinking about infrastructure, we slow down to actually say, what are the ways of asking artists and institutions to produce and share work? How are these pushing us to a point of crisis? Crisis, not just in terms of people being overworked, but crisis and like people don't have time to think about what they want to say, right? And so for me, I'm excited. This is a terrible moment. And it's also an exciting moment if we take up the challenge to actually think about what types of infrastructure we can build. And I guess the last thing that I'll say is I'm really interested in thinking about institutions that sort of work independent of one another, and how this is also a great opportunity to think about what are the interdisciplinary relationships between like a museum and a preschool, a museum and a welding factory, like actually thinking about these, or a set of writers or people who work in marine biology, to actually think about how are we building interconnected, intertextual, interdisciplinary, interdependent infrastructures, instead of a museum here, an arts program here, but actually how do we build community amongst those institutions?
Wonderful. I really thank you. Exactly. This is, I think these are the things that we all need to hear for, keeping our work going, and also not producing, tucked in a corner, or feeling that we are really cornered, but really like pushing up and opening up our space and finding our means in these limitations. So thank you for these really strong words. I'm seeing that we have this question that I shared with you, which I believe also is very important, and I'm seeing also that we are reaching our last 8 minutes. So I would love to hear your opinion about our audience question that says, thinking about infrastructure and survival, which artistic infrastructures do you see surviving? Museums, biennials, and art fairs. And it also fits with my final question with you, that how do you see conversation models changing between institutions, curators, and young artists, in order for us to create or like to change the notions of care in our community. So I feel this is like, these questions are both in connection with each other. So I would love to hear again from all of you in the same round, starting with Sandra, continuing with Lily, and closing with your words, Kameelah.
Thank you, Övül. This is something that some months ago I was also discussing my work with someone that in the UK that is very interesting at I guess putting recent graduates for fashion courses out there, and connecting with some opportunities, and this was a very similar question of how can we interfere with these relationships and make them more effective. And I sort of still have similar thoughts about it. I feel like the sort of languages and the sort of currencies that are required in these spaces are actually quite related with many different things. Let's say in my experience of Angola, they are very related with class. Class is very related with access to education. Access to education is very related with class again. And loads of other quite complicated relationships that I sort of, and connections that I've seen and that I'm aware of. So in a way, I feel like we almost need these spaces to allow languages and currencies that are not ready to be in the spaces yet, because they will become ready within the spaces. Just like it's really important that we have this opportunity to have this conversation today, and I have graduated pretty much 2 days ago, and it's very important that we exist in this space and can share and learn whilst in it. For example, my relationship with the gallery is very recent. I'm working with Jamek Art, that is Luanda-based, for maybe 3 or 4 months only. And this relationship could have started actually a year ago, and it started after I graduated. But it's so important that, I almost find it difficult sometimes to make it very clear of which works could I send documentation of to my gallery, because what works. So I think it's so important to start it at this stage and be exposed to the biennials, the art fairs, the museums at this stage where we almost don't have the languages yet, but we do, and not really wait for these finished products and these people that write and speak and articulate their works and their words in a way that is already inside that space. So in a way, they almost don't need to be introduced to that space.
Thank you. Thank you. And Lily?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again, please?
I would say our question is thinking about infrastructure and survival. What artistic infrastructure do you see surviving? Museums, biennials, and art fairs. And you can also involve in this answer what we have been planning to talk about changing tones of conversations among artists, curators, and like institutions from your position as a young artist in order to develop languages of care. How do you what kind of change do you see? But I think, as I said, these two questions are very attached to each other, so feel free to take from your own angle.
In terms of systems of care, I feel like it's a really important question and conversation that I think galleries, curators, or people in the art world should be asking the artists they work with directly, asking what systems of care or what ways they can better support their artists and their practices, as every artist will need different things. And I feel like to avoid well-intentioned, but like to avoid generalization and believing that you sort of know how to help support someone, I feel like it's always best to ask that individual you want to better support directly the ways that you can help them and what they need and what they would want. But for me, I think one of the things, okay, so we don't have very long, so I'll try and talk quickly. But one of the things I would say is that I feel like it's very important, especially right now, to allow artists and to give artists the space to self-identify ourselves and our identities and what our work is about and why we make the work that we do. I feel like it's one of the approaches we can hopefully take to try and move away from what can feel like a tokenization of historically overlooked artists and artists from marginalized communities, and to try and alleviate that pressure and that expectation on artists to make work about their identities or their lived experiences, or to almost, I guess, that pressure to perform their identities in a way that you might want or expect from them. And I don't know if I have time to say one more because I feel like I might be cutting into Kameelah's time.
Yeah,
so
it is good to. I think probably we will be extending a couple of more minutes because of our cut, but like
okay.
we are finalizing it's our last minute. In its last 3-4 minutes. So Kameelah, please.
I was just gonna say I've spoken a lot, so I actually want to hear what Lily has to say.
All right, Lily, then the turn for you, please.
Okay. Thank you, Kameelah. So I'm just trying to think what I said. So yeah, I guess then in terms of just for me, another thing that I personally would like to see is, I guess something that comes to mind is the power dynamics and what can often feel like quite an unequal power dynamic between creatives and those on the other side, or I guess the loosely more business side of the art world. I understand that in every work sector there are power dynamics at play, but I think in terms of this conversation, and if we're trying to create an environment that actually actively and intentionally supports artists at the start of their career better, I think it's important for, I guess, those who, I guess traditionally it feels like they hold more power or more bargaining power to actually take the time and care to create a work relationship that is both personal and one where the creative they're working with feels comfortable to, I guess, ask questions, ask for advice, or to bring up any, if applicable, any problems they might have within that work dynamic, and to feel like they have equal power to actually negotiate certain agreements or contracts as an actual equal partner, rather than feeling like, I guess sometimes you can as a creative that you're almost on the underfoot and you have to sort of take what you can get, or you're worried if you sort of say anything, you speak up, whether it's about a personal conflict in terms of how someone's directly communicating with you, or in terms of what you feel is an unfair contract agreement in terms of sales split. I feel like that, yeah, I sort of lost my point, but I feel like that's a really important thing to actually look at in itself, is trying to even out those power dynamics, and with that hopefully there'll be more, I guess, like mutual respect and trust there, and essentially you'll then both feel like equal partners in the relationship you're entering.
I mean, a very important point you made, and also you put it quite right and beautifully. Thank you. I think this power of negotiation and also re-understanding, our negotiation power, especially from your side as young artists, and changing, the way contracts are being made. I would also say not verbally, not like financially, but also like socially, also power-wise. It's a very important, I think, step for all of us actually to move into a different kind of dynamic for the system, for the art system that we are all living inside. So thank you. But Kameelah, nonetheless, I would love to take final words from you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra and Lily. It's really helpful to hear from artists who are based elsewhere about like what the needs are and what the infrastructure supports are.
Yeah.
I would say I notice a lot of times that we have like financial support in terms of like grants and prizes that are organized around asking artists to make more work. But I think one form of infrastructure that would be amazing is funding for artists just to think without the pressure of having to produce something. So like giving someone a bunch of money for them to sit and think for a year about what they're doing, and maybe they'll make something, but production is not like the thing that's being held over your head. I think that's one form of infrastructure that I'm really interested in. I think I'm also interested in what it means to find clearer pathways for artists to work with other cultural workers and folks who work inside of institutions. So I'm thinking about what are the opportunities for an artist to collaborate and support organizing, particularly union organizing, for the guards and for the other not well-paid folks who work in museum institutions. They do a lot of work, but I often feel like they're left out of these conversations around art institutions. They are literally the people who keep the stuff there, but yet are overlooked. So that's one form of infrastructure that I'm thinking about. Because I teach in a MFA graduate program now, I'm also really thinking about infrastructure that that is around curriculum that is more interdisciplinary. So what it means to be in an MFA fine arts program where students are introduced to a range of ideas, not because they chose to, but because that's an explicit part of how the curriculum is run. So I think and think about education. Yeah, and I guess the last thing, as a person who didn't go to art school, but now teaches in the art school, which is always a weird phenomenon for me, I'm really interested in thinking about how we invite and make space for folks who don't have that type of training or don't speak in those ways to also be part of these conversations. Because I do think that we, meaning people not trained in the arts, have interesting things to say. And I am also just always excited when I get to be on panels with like a poet or my husband who works in electrical work. It's like he has interesting things to say about art. And I think that those interdisciplinary conversations are super helpful.
I definitely agree with you. I'm also currently working a lot on this thread in my educational work as well, and I really see your point that these interdisciplinary conversations are also another really way of like strengthening our our ties to outside and building another sort of system. So thank you all for this wonderful conversation, and I think all of you three really made very important points, and it is really very I believe it's very important like to iterate these necessities over and over again, especially in a changing time that we are going through. And I would like to thank you all for your time and your generosity and sharing your opinions also directly, which I believe also very important for our audience, whom I believe like also share with a lot of those ideas, those positions also with you. So with that, I would like to also thank to our dear translating team who kept up with our conversation and who really did the background work in order for us to communicate with our non-English speaking audience. and like the whole technical team really made it possible, like build this infrastructure for us in order to make this conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, those in the background to things possible, and also my wonderful colleague Ana Alvarez to enable us. And I would say this is like we try to get a quite quick glimpse, because this is of course a very long conversation, and it should be reiterated in different parts. But if you have also questions, I believe like there would be ways also to get in touch with us via ARCO team if you'd like to continue the conversation. So with that, I wish you all a good evening, and have a good rest of the day ahead, Kameelah, in the East Coast, and all our audience also following from all around the world, I believe. It was wonderful to see your presence in numbers, despite we couldn't meet in faces, but hopefully for face-to-face meetings and in-depth conversations soon for another climate that we want to build for our work and for the culture to be also continuing that kind of a different, strong direction for our society. So thank you and good night. Thanks a lot. Bye. Thank you.